Aloha everyone. So to begin the muscular system, we are going to cover the very basics. Now, if you're taking an advanced class, they might go more in depth with this, but I'm just giving you a brief overview of the muscular system in this lecture. All right, so the muscular system, and are these all the muscles that you have in your body? Well, these are kind of like what I like to nickname the bodybuilder muscles, because most of them are superficial. You can kind of see, especially if you build them up in hypertrophy a lot, then these can bulge out and you can really see the definition in them. But they're not all the muscles. As you can see, you can sometimes have to cut through layers of muscles to see muscles underneath. And these aren't all the muscles in your body. Now, if you're taking my course, then this is a good place to start because these are easily identifiable muscles. They contribute to a lot of the movements in your body. So this is where you should start if you haven't started memorizing and identifying, and you should be able to do it both ways. Like if I point out a muscle, or if your anatomy professor points out a muscle, you should be able to name it. But if your professor or instructor asks you, okay, they name a muscle and ask you where it is, you should also be able to do that as well. Now, so there's a lot of muscles, but how many muscles do you exactly have in your body? Well, depends on who you ask. Now, here's the old book, the Martini book we used to use, and it says approximately 700. And then here's another journal, and there's also a number I hear often, and I had a hard time tracking down. Like another number I hear quoted often is 640. And this is like the best source I could actually try down to an actual reference, and then or original reference, I should say. And if you ask the experts, these anatomists who get together every so often and they debate and they actually come up with an official classification for everything in your body. Well, this is the authority. Terminologia Anatomica. I know I'm not part of this society, but thing is that they have all these muscles, and if you just search for them, it may be 650 or 800. And what do they disagree on? Why is there such a big variation? Well, it depends if you talk about a muscle as a group or if you count them individually. So if you count them individually, you're going to have a higher number. If you group them together, it's going to be a smaller number. And if you are using the OpenStax or our UHAMP, what does it say? It just says a large number. So this is the thing. Am I going to ask, if you're taking my course, am I going to ask you how many muscles are there in the human body? The experts don't agree. So if you had to be pressed for that, it's somewhere between, I think this is a good range, like 640 to 800. But usually when there's this is such a wide range, I don't ask this question. So just letting you know. But how many bones are there in the body? Well, we'll say 206. So there's definitely a lot more muscles than bones in your body. Now, here are muscular system tips, and I say tips because they're not official rules, but these are things that can help you in studying the muscular system if you're studying it for the first time. All right, so again, this is my disclaimer. This is for the studying in this course. Other courses you take may be more specific. Now, we have to talk about origins and insertions. So all muscles have at least one origin and possibly at least one insertion. Some have multiple. Now, they attach to at least two sites, so there's at least one origin and one insertion. And the origin is like when you originate from something, that's where you started out with, right? You're where you started from. Or if you remember geometry and math, the origin is the starting point, 0, 0. But origin is that's the start. Now, this is the origin in a muscle that stays in place relative what is called the insertion. So often you have like a tendon that extends from the muscle and attaches to somewhere else in the body. And this is the part that moves. So the origin is supposed to stay in place and the insertion is the part that moves. Now here we have the flexion of the elbow here, and here we have the extension right here. And what we see is that the origin is staying in place, but if you flex right here, this insertion would move here. If you had extension the other way, well, that would be just relaxing that muscle, but we'll talk more about it later. Okay. So key point, that origins are the ones that stay in place, but insertions, they are the weight that's being moved, and when the muscle contracts, the origin pulls the insertion. That's why I have this little command pulling that weight, because the origin is supposed to be anchored. Pretend he's not moving and he's just staying there, and he's pulling with all his muscle and whatnot. So that's what happens. Insertions always pull toward origins. Now, thing is that back to our tips. So here we apply it to this muscle, the biceps brachii. So the insertion is right here on the radius, And this, what here, so the things that insertions, when they pull, they're pulling the mass and weight of everything that's attached to that insertion. So what's happening is that the origin is up here, the shoulder, and what happens is that when this pulls, then it's going to pull it up like this. It's going to pull the insertion toward the origin. So when you contract your biceps, it causes flexion because it's going to move this closer, and it's going to shorten this muscle and pull this insertion toward the origin, and thereby narrowing this angle over here. So yep, insertions always pull toward origins. Now, then we have to talk about muscle cells. So remember that muscle cells, when they contract, they always shorten. And they call it sarcomeric shortening, that when they have the myofibroproteins, they start out like this when they're relaxed, but they pull each other so they become closer and closer together. So that's how our muscle cells contract. And if you have a whole bunch of muscle cells contracting, that's how our muscles contract. So this is how, so when you have contraction, things shorten as we went from this point to this point. So that is contraction. Now back to actual muscles. So the things that your muscle cells have to be attached to something, right? Otherwise they're just going to shrink, and like a slug that has salt on it or something, it's just going to shrink and just pull like this. But this is how your muscles are able to move things like your skeleton and your body. So if you attach it to something solid like an origin, and I know no bone looks like this, but I'm just using it as a placeholder bone. So if you have an origin that stays in place and an insertion on a bone or some other structure, what's going to happen when it contracts? Well, if the origin stays in place, this insertion will move toward the origin. So this is how bones move toward other bones. If you have one as the origin and the insertion, that's how it can move toward this origin over here. Okay, so then you might be like, okay, so wait, if muscles always cut, and what you see is like, okay, this insertion is pulling toward the origin. Now, I said like individual muscles pull, they don't push. But the thing is that if you weight train, or you might have heard of something called push-pull training split, where you do push exercises on one day and then you pull exercises another day, and maybe leg day during those exercises, or maybe its own day. But yeah, like this example. So notice that a lot of these push exercises are like a lot of presses, and pulls are a lot of like rows. But I'm like, okay, if individual muscles pull, why are there push exercises? And so then this is one of my favorite exercises. So bench press, or even a push-up, does the same overall movement. So what happens during bench press? You start off with your arms like this and your elbows like that, and you're in this starting position, and then you press up, right? And what does the bench press exercise? Well, definitely exercises the chest, but it also exercises the deltoids, the shoulder muscles over here, and also the triceps over here. Now, thing is that, okay, we've started here and we actually pushed, and we pushed something away from our bodies. So how do muscles pull and somehow push? Well, let's look at these muscles individually. So here we have the triceps, here we have the anterior deltoids, and then we have the pectoralis major over here. So what happens is that during bench press, what happens to the arm and the elbow? Well, it starts off bent like this, but you end up straightening it out, right? So to straighten it out, what do you need to do? You need to contract this triceps brachii over here. So when you contract these tricep muscles on the back of your arm, what does it do? It actually extends your elbow. So that is one part of the push, even though by itself it's actually contracting and drawing this elbow closer toward the back of your arm. So that's why it kind of extends that angle. Now over here with the front of your delts, what's it doing? Well, it's contracting and pulling and shortening. So by doing that, when your arm starts out back here, if you contract your delts, it starts to move it forward like this. And even without moving your elbow, I mean, if you just contract that, that's going to move your overall arm forward at the shoulder blade. And here, the pectoralis major. So your pec majors, they start off over here and they insert on your shoulder over here. So when you contract those, that's going to bring things in toward. So that's another thing that's going to move the arm. It's going to bring this arm forward like that. So if you contract that, all these three muscles at the same time, what do you have? You're moving your arm forward, but you're also extending it at the same time. So, or extending at the elbow at the same time. So even though the overall direction is a push, individually, these muscles that are helping with that are contracting, they are shortening, they are pulling. But when they all work at the same time, it's overall push exercise. So again, individuals, they pull, so they're still pulling individually, but sometimes they can have overall push movement if you add some of these together, depending on where they are. All right, so that is like oranges and nut insertions. Again, if you're taking a more advanced class, then they might go more in detail about oranges and insertions, but those are the basics for this class.